Morning.
Can I see some ID, sir?
For what? I'm just taking my trash.
Neighborhood's had some break-ins. Need to know who you are.
I live right here. Not doing anything wrong.
I didn't ask if you were. Hand me your ID.
I'm not required to.
Look, you refuse and I'll put you in cuffs right now. Last chance.
You might want to rethink that. Government attorney, federal public defense.
Officer Evan Rohr had been working with the Atlanta Police Department for less than 11 months when he made a choice that would destroy his career before it truly began. On a calm weekday morning in a quiet Atlanta suburb, he spotted a black man outside a home, rolling a trash bin toward the street. There was nothing illegal happening, nothing that should have raised concern, nothing that posed any danger, but this young officer convinced himself he needed to investigate. The man he was watching was 34-year-old Jamal Cross, a federal prosecutor actively employed with the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Georgia. That split-second decision, a moment of self-doubt dressed up as police duty, would become one of the costliest mistakes any rookie officer in Atlanta had ever made. By the time everything was said and done, Georgia taxpayers would foot the bill. And Officer Rohr, he'd never wear a badge again. Before we go any further, let us know where you're tuning in from. If this is your first visit here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one deserve attention, and when you support us, you help bring more truth into the open. Jamal Cross started his day at 6:15 a.m. just like usual. Coffee first, then a shower, followed by reviewing case notes over toast, checking his emails, and getting dressed. At 34, Cross had spent 6 years working for the U.S. Attorney's Office in Georgia's Northern District. He handled white-collar crimes, fraud, corruption, embezzlement, the kind of cases that demand patience, sharp attention to detail, and the ability to unravel complicated financial schemes. His coworkers saw him as steady and thoughtful. His bosses considered him dependable. His track record said it all: solid prosecutions, strong courtroom skills, and thorough preparation. Cross wasn't the flashy type. He didn't chase the spotlight. He lived in a peaceful suburban neighborhood in East Atlanta, drove a simple sedan, and kept his personal life out of the public eye. That was a deliberate choice. His job was demanding enough. Home was meant to be straightforward, safe, and calm. That particular morning was a Tuesday, which meant trash pickup. Cross threw on a light gray hoodie, dark jeans, and sneakers, comfortable, casual clothes, the kind anyone would wear for a quick trip outside. He grabbed his coffee mug, walked down his driveway, and wheeled the trash bin out to the curb. The time was 7:42 a.m. The sun was already up. The street was peaceful. Some neighbors had already left for work. A few cars drove past. Nothing unusual was going on. Nothing was out of place. This was as ordinary as it gets, a man in his own driveway taking care of his trash. And yet this is exactly where everything started to go wrong. Not because of danger, not because of any crime, but simply because Jamal Cross was a black man going about his business in a space where someone else decided he didn't fit. At first, Jamal didn't notice the patrol car. His mind was on a deposition he had scheduled later that morning, mentally running through questions, making notes about evidence he'd need to bring up. He positioned the bin at the curb, made sure the lid was fastened, and turned to head back up his driveway. That's when he caught sight of the cruiser slowing down, coming to a stop right in front of his house. Cross stopped, mug still in hand, and watched as the patrol car pulled over to the curb and the engine went quiet. He felt that all too familiar tightness in his chest, the kind that every black person in this country recognizes. The moment when you realize someone else watching you, when what felt normal suddenly feels uncertain. But this was his property, his home, his driveway. He hadn't done a single thing wrong, so he stayed composed, took a sip of his coffee, and waited. The officer got out. Jamal's first instinct was logical. Maybe there was a break-in somewhere nearby. Maybe the officer was going door-to-door checking on things. But the way this officer moved, stiff, focused, walking straight toward him, told a different story. This wasn't a friendly neighborhood check. This was a confrontation in the making. Cross stayed put, keeping his hands in plain sight, his body language calm but alert. The officer stopped at the edge of the driveway. Young guy, early 20s, crew cut, brand new uniform. He had that rigid kind of confidence that comes from inexperience trying to look like control. "Morning," the officer said, his tone flat and emotionless. "Can I see some ID?" Cross frowned. "ID for what?" "Just need to verify who you are." "Verify I'm standing in my own driveway. This is my house." The officer's eyes scanned Cross up and down, the hoodie, the jeans, the coffee mug. "You live here?" "Yes, I live here." "Can you prove that?" And there it was, the question that should never have been asked. Cross kept his tone steady. "I don't have to prove I live in my own home. What's this about?" The officer's jaw tightened. "I'm asking you to provide identification." "And I'm asking you why. What's the reason for this stop? What am I being accused of?" "I didn't say you were accused of anything." "Then why are you here?" The officer didn't have an answer because there was no answer. No service call, no complaint, no crime. Just a rookie who saw a black man and decided something must be off. But it makes you wonder, have you ever been in a moment like this yourself? Drop a comment and share your experience. Officer Evan Rohr had been with the Atlanta Police Department for 10 months. 10 months of trying to prove he belonged. 10 months of wanting to be taken seriously. 10 months of feeling like he was always playing catch-up, always too cautious, always questioning himself. At the academy, he did fine, not top of the class, but solid. He passed his tests, finished his physical training, and graduated without any problems. But field training, that had been tougher. His training officer had written in one of his evaluations, Officer Rohr tends to hesitate in uncertain situations, needs to develop more assertive command presence. That phrase, assertive command presence, stuck with him. It felt like a jab, like he was too soft, too hesitant, too quick to calm things down instead of taking charge. Back at the precinct, some of the veteran officers teased him. They called him by the book, said he was too polite, too passive. Rohr hated it. He didn't want to be seen as weak. He didn't want to be the rookie who couldn't hold his own. So when he saw Jamal Cross that morning, a black man in a residential neighborhood outside early, wearing a hoodie, something clicked in Rohr's head. This felt like an opportunity, a chance to show initiative, to be proactive, to prove that he wasn't afraid to engage. There was no call, no complaint, no crime, but Rohr didn't think he needed one. He had instincts, and his instincts told him, check this out. So he stopped, he approached, he demanded ID. This is where insecurity becomes dangerous. Evan Rohr didn't stop Jamal Cross because he genuinely thought Cross was a criminal. He stopped him because Rohr needed to feel like he was doing something, like he was asserting authority, like he was the kind of cop who didn't let things slide. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about crime prevention. It was about ego. It was about proving himself. It was about filling the silence with action so he wouldn't feel passive. And Jamal Cross, a federal prosecutor standing in his own driveway holding a coffee mug, was about to pay the price for a rookie's insecurity. I'm not showing you ID, Cross said calmly. I'm on my own property. I haven't committed any offense. You have no legal basis to demand identification. Rohr's face flushed red. I'm a police officer. I have the authority to ask for ID. You have the authority to ask. I have the right to refuse, unless you have reasonable suspicion of a crime, which you don't. Rohr stepped closer. Are you refusing to comply? I'm exercising my rights. There's a difference. If you don't cooperate, I'm going to assume you have something to hide. Cross's voice stayed level, but now there was a sharper edge to it. Assume whatever you want. I'm not required to prove my innocence in my own driveway. And that was it. That was the moment Rohr felt his authority being challenged. Not because Cross was being aggressive, not because Cross was threatening him, but because Cross wasn't afraid. He wasn't backing down. He wasn't deferring. He wasn't treating Rohr like someone who deserved automatic obedience. And to Evan Rohr, a rookie desperate to assert control, that felt like defiance. Rohr's hand moved to his belt. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Cross's eyes widened. You're detaining me. You're refusing to cooperate. I'm standing in my driveway. I haven't committed a crime. You have no legal justification for this. Turn around. Officer, you're making a mistake. Last chance. Cross didn't move, not out of defiance, out of disbelief. He was a federal prosecutor. He knew the law, he knew his rights, and he knew that what was happening right now was unlawful. But he also knew that arguing with an officer who'd already decided to escalate rarely ended well, so he made a choice. He reached slowly toward his back pocket. I'm getting my credentials, Cross said clearly. I'm a federal attorney. I'm going to show you my badge. Rohr's hand moved toward his taser. Don't reach for anything. I'm showing you my identification. You asked for ID. I'm giving it to you. Keep your hands where I can see them. They are where you can see them. And then Rohr grabbed Cross's wrist. Do you think rookies should be allowed to patrol without mandatory pairing during their entire first year? Let us know what you think in the comments. The moment Rohr's hand closed around Cross's wrist, everything shifted. This was no longer a conversation. This was physical force, an attempt to detain, and it was completely unjustified. Cross pulled his arm back instinctively, not to fight, but to protect himself. Get your hands off me. Stop resisting. I'm not resisting, you're assaulting me. Rohr yanked harder, trying to spin Cross around. Cross kept his balance, his free hand still reaching for his back pocket. I'm a federal attorney, Cross shouted, his voice sharp now, urgent. I work for the U.S. Attorney's Office. Stop. But Rohr wasn't listening. He was locked in now, adrenaline, ego, fear, all of it pushing him forward. He grabbed Cross's other arm and tried to force it behind his back. Cross resisted, not violently, but firmly, trying to maintain control of his own body. "You're making this worse," Roar shouted. "You're the one making it worse," Cross shot back. "I'm trying to show you my badge." And then finally, Cross managed to pull his credential case from his pocket. He held it up, flipping it open with one hand while Roar still had a grip on his other arm. The badge was unmistakable, gold, federal, embossed with the seal of the U.S. Department of Justice. U.S. Attorney's Office, Northern District of Georgia, Jamal Cross, Assistant U.S. Attorney. Roar froze, his grip loosened, his eyes went wide, his face drained of color. He stared at the badge like it was a bomb that had just gone off in his hands. For a moment, neither man moved. Cross was breathing hard, his arm still aching from where Roar had grabbed him. His coffee mug was on the ground, spilled across the driveway. Roar stood there, his hands still hovering near Cross's arm, his mind trying to catch up with what had just happened. He'd just used force on a federal prosecutor, at his own residence, without cause, the worst possible person in the worst possible way, and it was all on his body camera. A second patrol car pulled up. Officer Lisa Chen stepped out immediately, reading the tension in the air. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp. Roar stammered, "I was checking, he wouldn't show ID." Cross turned to Chen, holding up his credentials. "I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Jamal Cross. I live here. This is my house. Your officer just physically detained me in my own driveway for taking out my trash." Chen's eyes went wide. She looked at the badge, then at Roar, then back at Cross. "Sir, I'm so sorry," she said immediately. "Are you injured?" "My arm hurts where he grabbed me, but I'm fine." Chen turned to Roar, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "What were you thinking?" "I didn't know." "You didn't verify, you just grabbed him." Roar had no response. Chen looked at Cross again. "Sir, I'm calling a supervisor. This shouldn't have happened." Cross nodded, his jaw tight. He was calm professionally, legally calm, but the anger was there, simmering beneath the surface. "You just used force on a federal attorney," Cross said quietly, looking directly at Roar, at his own residence, without probable cause, without reasonable suspicion, without any legal justification whatsoever. Roar's face went pale. He knew exactly what he'd done, and he knew his career was over. Within 15 minutes, a supervisor arrived, Sergeant Marcus Williams, a 16-year veteran who'd seen enough to know when something had gone very, very wrong. He spoke briefly with Chen, then with Cross, then pulled Roar aside. "Tell me what happened," Williams said, his voice cold. Roar tried to explain. "I saw him outside. I thought I wanted to verify." "Verify what? What crime did you suspect?" I thought it looked." "You thought what?" Roar couldn't say it, but they both knew. He'd seen a black man in a residential neighborhood and assumed something was wrong. Williams closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. "Give me your body camera right now." Roar unclipped it and handed it over. "You're done for the day," Williams said. "Go back to the station. Don't talk to anyone. Internal Affairs will contact you." Roar nodded mutely and walked back to his patrol car, moving like someone in shock. Williams turned to Cross, who was standing on his driveway, arms crossed, watching everything unfold. "Mr. Cross, I apologize on behalf of the Atlanta Police Department. This was completely unacceptable." Cross nodded but didn't speak immediately. He was a prosecutor. He knew how these things went. Apologies were easy. Accountability was harder. "I want a copy of the body camera footage," Cross said, "and I want a formal incident report today." "You'll have both. And I want to know what happens to that officer." Williams hesitated. "I can't discuss personnel matters." "I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you I'll be following up, as a private citizen, and as a federal prosecutor who knows exactly what my rights are." Williams nodded, understood. "At this point, if you were Jamal, would you forgive, or would you pursue full accountability? Comment below." By that afternoon, the story had reached the U.S. Attorney's Office. By evening, it was in the hands of the FBI's Civil Rights Division. By the next morning, it was on the desk of the Atlanta Police Department's Internal Affairs Commander, flagged as high priority, high visibility, and high risk. Jamal Cross didn't go to the media. He didn't post on social media. He didn't make a spectacle. He did what he did in court. He built a case. He contacted a civil rights attorney. He filed a formal complaint. He requested all body camera footage, dispatch logs, and personnel records related to Officer Evan Roar. And what he found was damning. Evan Rohr's training file contained multiple red flags. His field training officer had noted, Officer Rohr struggles with determining when to engage versus when to observe, tends to escalate situations that could be resolved through conversation. Another evaluation stated, needs improvement in constitutional standards for stops and searches, has been verbally reminded multiple times about the requirements for reasonable suspicion. A third report mentioned, Officer Rohr appears motivated by a desire to prove himself rather than by genuine safety concerns. Recommend additional mentorship before clearing for solo patrol. But Rohr had been cleared anyway, because the department was understaffed, because supervisors were overworked, because red flags are easy to ignore when you need bodies on the street. So Rohr went solo, and those red flags became predictors. The Department of Justice reviewed the case and determined that Cross's civil rights had been violated. The stop was unlawful, no reasonable suspicion, no probable cause, no legal justification. The use of force was unlawful. Physical detention without cause constitutes excessive force under federal law. The DOJ issued a letter of findings recommending disciplinary action and policy review. But Jamal Cross wasn't satisfied with a letter. He filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. Named defendants, Officer Evan Rohr, the supervising officers who cleared him for patrol, and the City of Atlanta. Claims: Fourth Amendment violation, unlawful seizure, excessive force under color of law, failure to train and supervise, municipal liability for inadequate screening and oversight. The city's attorneys reviewed the case and came to a quick conclusion: this was indefensible. The victim was a federal prosecutor. The evidence was on body camera. The officer had no legal justification. The department's own evaluations showed they'd ignored warnings. Settlement negotiations began immediately. The city didn't want this going to trial. They didn't want discovery revealing how many other officers had been cleared despite red flags. They didn't want a jury hearing that a federal attorney had been assaulted in his own driveway for taking out trash. So they settled fast. $3 million paid by the City of Atlanta, funded by taxpayers. Officer Evan Rohr was terminated 6 weeks after the incident. The termination letter was blunt. Officer Rohr engaged in an unlawful stop, unjustified use of force, and conduct that violated department policy and constitutional standards. His actions have exposed the city to significant legal and financial liability. His employment is terminated immediately. His law enforcement certification was revoked by the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council. His name was entered into the National Decertification Index. He would never work in law enforcement again, not in Georgia, not anywhere. His career, less than a year old, was over, and it ended because he couldn't distinguish between asserting authority and abusing it. Do you think $3 million is enough for what happened here, or should the city have paid more? Let me know. Jamal Cross did nothing but take trash out in his own driveway. Let that sink in. He wasn't walking in a high-crime area. He wasn't out late at night. He wasn't dressed in a way that could be misinterpreted. He wasn't doing anything that anyone, regardless of race, wouldn't do on a Tuesday morning. He was existing in his own space, on his own property, and that was enough to trigger suspicion from a rookie cop who needed to feel like he was doing something. This wasn't about crime. This wasn't about danger. This wasn't about public safety. This was about insecurity, about ego, about a young officer who'd been told he needed command presence and mistook aggression for authority. Evan Rohr wanted to prove he wasn't soft. He wanted to show he could take initiative. He wanted to be the kind of cop who didn't back down, so he created a confrontation where none existed. He escalated a situation that should never have started. And he used force on a man who committed no crime, posed no threat, and had every right to be exactly where he was. And it cost him everything. The system that produced Evan Rohr failed long before he grabbed Jamal Cross's wrist. It failed when it ignored red flags in his training evaluations. It failed when it rushed him through field training to fill staffing gaps. It failed when it prioritized assertive command presence over constitutional knowledge. It failed when it sent a rookie with documented issues onto the street without proper oversight. Rohr made the choice, but the system enabled it. Jamal Cross continued working as a federal prosecutor, but after the incident, he became more vocal about police accountability. He spoke at training seminars. He testified before city councils. He wrote opinion pieces about the experience. His message was consistent. I'm a lawyer, I know my rights, I have resources, I have credibility, and I was still treated like a suspect in my own driveway. If this can happen to me, what happens to people without my advantages? What happens to people who don't have badges, degrees, or platforms? What happens to them when a rookie decides normal life looks suspicious? He never got an answer that satisfied him. The $3 million settlement didn't undo the violation. It didn't erase the moment Jamal Cross stood in his driveway wondering if he was about to be arrested, or worse, for taking out his trash. It didn't undo the trauma of having your safety questioned in the one place where you should feel most secure, your home. Money is accountability, but it's not justice. Justice would be a system that never put Evan Rohr on the street. Justice would be training that teaches de-escalation before confrontation. Justice would be supervisors who take red flags seriously instead of checking boxes. Justice would be a world where a black man can take out his trash without wondering if a police officer is going to decide he doesn't belong. What lesson should police departments take from this if they actually wanted to prevent cases like this? Drop your answer below. This story matters because it shows how normal life can become dangerous when authority is driven by insecurity instead of necessity. If you think rookies should complete full training with mandatory psychological evaluations and extended field supervision before patrolling alone, comment below. If you believe departments that ignore red flags should face consequences when those officers harm people, let me know. And if you think these stories need to be told, that accountability starts with awareness, hit that subscribe button, because we're not stopping. We're going to keep exposing the patterns. We're going to keep demanding better. Jamal Cross shouldn't have had to fight for his rights in his own driveway, but he did, and he won. And maybe, just maybe, his story will prevent the next rookie from making the same mistake.